Why does your breathing organ rise when you see me? Human. He didn't expect her to speak so bluntly. Standing no more than a breath away, her violet skin glowing faintly under the artificial light, Cora tilted her head with a mix of curiosity and calculation. Her gaze locked on him, not like a woman observing a man, but like a scientist dissecting a wild, beautiful anomaly. Her words cut through the silence. Why does your breathing organ rise the moment I appear? Human? Is your desire for me truly that uncontrollable? Richard froze. 1,000 explanations collided in his head, none of them logical, none that would make sense to her. To an alien who had never known touch as anything more than biology. But this wasn't biology. Not anymore. He wasn't supposed to feel this. He was trained, assigned, equipped to observe, not to want. Yet here he stood, heartbeat hammering, nerve endings lit up like warning signals. Cora stepped closer. Her silver-white hair brushed her shoulders like liquid starlight. Her eyes, too deep, too ancient, searched his face not for answers, but for proof. Proof of what? He didn't know. But something in her presence dissolved the walls he'd spent a lifetime building. As if her mere existence exposed a vulnerability in him he had never dared to examine. And she knew it. This was no ordinary encounter. No experiment, no field report, no harmless observation. This was the edge of something forbidden. Something that could unravel two civilizations. And yet, neither of them moved. It started, as most monumental shifts do, with a handshake. Only this wasn't one of those symbolic, camera-ready gestures between world leaders. No flags, no reporters. Just a man and a creature not of Earth, alone in a sterilized chamber. One hesitating step from rewriting everything he thought he knew about intimacy, instinct, and alien intelligence. Richard stood still as the glass door sealed behind him with a hiss. Before him, she waited. Cora, an envoy from the Zeluri Dominion, a race that had only revealed themselves to Earth's hidden upper councils 5 years ago. Contact was delicate, political, wrapped in hundreds of conditions. And despite their superior technology, the Zeluri had only allowed a handful of humans to interact directly. Richard was chosen for 2 reasons: his discipline and his detachment. But those 2 virtues began to fracture the moment she raised her hand. It wasn't quite a hand. It was elegant, yes, 5 fingers, humanoid in form, but the joints were subtly wrong, too fluid. The skin shimmered in a tone that wasn't color in the human sense. It changed with light, with thought, with mood. Richard extended his hand slowly, and the contact sent a jolt. Not electric, but visceral. Something ancient stirred inside him. Like a deeply buried script within his DNA had been abruptly awakened. Her touch lingered, just a second longer than protocol required. And her eyes, those eyes, watched him with something he couldn't name. Not curiosity, not suspicion. Something closer. Do humans always tremble at introduction? She asked. Her voice didn't come from her mouth. It resonated inside his skull, low and soft, like water lapping against the walls of his mind. He cleared his throat. Not always. You are warm, she noted. You're cold, he replied. A pause. Then, surprisingly, she smiled. And that was the first crack in his defense. They called it an observation room, but Richard knew better. It was a cage with no bars, designed to see who would falter first. Every surface was smooth, curved, non-threatening, but sterile in the way all high-security research installations are. The only sign of comfort was the lighting. Dim, golden, atmospheric. Too intimate for scientific neutrality. He sat across from her at the low table. She examined him with open intensity, unashamed of her gaze. He, meanwhile, tried to focus on his datapad, but his thoughts blurred with every breath she took. How much of your behavior is biological? She asked. He looked up. Define behavior. Your posture, your scent fluctuations, the dilation of your pupils, the tension in your lower limbs. These all spike when I enter. Why? Richard forced a smile. You're very observant. It is my role, she replied. But your responses suggest more than simple chemical adjustment. There is reaction, a kind of urgency. He shifted in his seat. Maybe your species just triggers something in us. Do you desire me? The question landed like a slap. Richard's ears rang. He glanced toward the wall, wondering if the cameras were recording this. Of course they were. Every second of this interaction would be reviewed, dissected, politicized. That's not relevant to the mission. Cora leaned forward. It is to me. For a being whose culture viewed mating as a mechanical necessity, Cora was disturbingly fluent in the language of tension. Her proximity, the tilt of her head, the softness of her voice, it wasn't intentional seduction. It was analysis, but that only made it more disarming. Your physiology is fascinating, she continued, but even more so is your struggle to suppress it. Richard bristled. You think I'm weak? I think you're human. Over the following days, their sessions grew longer. What began as structured interviews slowly drifted into conversations. Debates. Moments of silence that lingered too long to be professional. Cora revealed fragments of her world. How Zellury chose mates based on genetic resonance, not attraction. How touch was functional, never emotional. How their species considered love a cognitive parasite, something they engineered out generations ago. And yet, she kept circling back to it. To him, Richard found himself revealing more than protocol allowed. About Earth, about how humans dream, about loneliness. He told her how children grow up imagining stories of falling stars and beings from other galaxies. How people chase connection across oceans, cultures, timelines. You find meaning in chaos, she whispered one day. Maybe, he replied, or maybe we're just scared of being alone. She looked at him then, not like an alien studying a human, but like a woman trying to understand a man. And something inside him cracked again. On the 6th day, the observation room changed. The air felt heavier, the temperature warmer, even the lights dimmed further. She entered with no words, just a glance that lingered too long. Richard had stopped pretending he was unaffected. His hands trembled. His heart betrayed him in rhythm. When she sat beside him, not across, he didn't move away. Their shoulders nearly touched. I have observed other humans, she said. None react to me the way you do. I'm not sure that's a compliment. It is not. It is data. He smirked. Do you always collect data this close? No, she answered. Only when the sample resists. He turned to face her. Her breath was cool against his cheek, her expression unreadable. And then she asked it. That line, that question, the one that would burn its way into his memory forever. Why does your breeding organ rise the moment I appear, human? Is your desire for me truly that uncontrollable? It wasn't just clinical. It wasn't just curious. It was challenge, invitation, accusation. Richard swallowed hard. His voice came slow, low, honest. I don't know, he said, but I've stopped trying to control it. For a moment, she didn't reply. Then, softly, almost like a confession, neither have I. She was not supposed to feel anything. Cora had studied over 24 sentient species across 7 planetary systems. She had dissected mating behaviors, documented hormonal cycles, and archived every known biological impulse from creatures who bred through touch, sound, light, and even atmospheric exchange. But humans, particularly Richard, were a deviation she had not anticipated. Not biologically. That part was predictable. Elevated heart rate, temperature fluctuations, pheromone spikes, classic mammalian signs of reproductive readiness. The science was clear. What wasn't clear, what her models could not account for, was how deeply her own responses were beginning to shift. Illogical, disruptive, increasingly difficult to suppress. Cora's kind had abandoned emotional bonding centuries ago. On Zeliar, attachment was classified as a social vulnerability, evolutionary clutter that hindered focus, advancement, unity. They were a society built on efficiency, precision, harmony without chaos. But here, in Earth's humid atmosphere, under its turbulent magnetic field, its sensory overload, its messy, unpredictable creatures, Cora found herself unraveling. And it all centered around him. She reviewed the recordings from their prior session, watching herself pose the question she was still trying to understand. Why does your breeding organ rise the moment I appear, human? Is your desire for me truly that uncontrollable? She hadn't meant it to sound intimate. It was meant as inquiry, observation. But as she replayed the scene, she caught something in her own voice, something warmer than logic, something closer. She isolated the audio, ran tonal analysis, detected a 3.2% shift in her cadence. That was statistically significant. But instead of correcting the anomaly, she replayed it. Again and again. Her lips moved with the words on screen, not in analysis, but in mimicry. In memory. She shut the tablet abruptly. This was getting dangerous. She retreated to the calibration chamber, her assigned meditation zone, and sat cross-legged on the suspended platform. Light filtered through the semi-transparent walls like liquid gold. Scifi physiology was designed to absorb ambient radiation, metabolizing it into clarity. Peace. Normally, this worked. Today, it didn't. Her thoughts returned again to Richard's eyes. Not the shape, not the color, but the way they changed. The way they focused on her when she spoke. Not just listening, but feeling. It unsettled her. Not because it was alien, but because it was familiar. She activated her private log. Not for the council. Not for the scientists. Just for herself. Personal record. Entry 7. Subject. Human male. Designation Richard. Observations. Conflicted. Variables shifting. I experienced a response today. Not chemical. Not instinctual. It felt like yearning. I do not understand the mechanics of this feeling. It is not hunger. Not urgency. It is slow. Growing. Unwanted. Yet not unpleasant. When I leave the chamber, I feel lesser. When I return, I anticipate him. That is dangerous. That is attachment. But how can a flaw feel like a flame I do not want to extinguish? She paused, deleted the last sentence, rewrote it. I am deviating. I must isolate this variable before it spreads. But she didn't isolate it. She nurtured it. And that terrified her. Her elders had warned of this. Scifi who stayed too long among passion-driven species often returned compromised. One had fallen into a rhythm of mimicry, emulating human laughter, and never recovered emotional equilibrium. Another had disappeared entirely, leaving behind only a handwritten letter sealed in something called perfume. Emotion is a contagion, the high thinker once said, and no mind, however evolved, is immune if exposed long enough. Cora had believed she was immune. Now she wasn't so sure. She requested time alone with Richard the next day, under the pretense of gathering deeper psychological data. He agreed without hesitation. The room felt smaller this time, more intimate. The silence between them no longer sterile, but charged. Tell me, she said softly, what is love? He blinked. That's a complicated question. Define it. I'm not sure I can. She tilted her head. On Zeliar, everything has a definition. Is it not the same here? Richard chuckled, low, genuine. That's the problem with humans, he said. We keep inventing words for things we don't fully understand. Love is one of them. Is it like desire? No, not exactly. Desire fades. Love lingers. It's not just wanting someone. It's needing them to exist. She absorbed this. Needing someone to exist. What a terrifying idea. And yet, she found herself wondering, would she still function if Richard disappeared? Would the air still feel breathable? Would light still look the same? She asked another question. Do you love me? The words came out before she could apply the proper filter. Richard didn't answer right away. He looked at her, long and hard. Not with lust. Not even with awe. With something raw. I don't know, he said. But I know I'd break something inside me if I had to walk away. Her breathing hitched. That was a problem. Scifi don't hitch. That night, she couldn't sleep. Her dreams, normally blank and efficient, were littered with flickers of memory. The slope of his jaw, the heat of his skin, the way he spoke her name like it mattered. She sat up, pressing her hands against the cool floor. This was no longer about biology. This was infection, emotional contagion, and she was the vector. In the following days, she became erratic. Her reports were delayed. Her response is slower. She spent more time in Earth's artificial garden habitats, tracing leaves with fingers that trembled. And she avoided Richard, not because she didn't want to see him, but because she did, and that made her dangerous. Finally, the council intervened. They summoned her remotely, 3 holograms standing in judgment, composed of light but radiating cold authority. Your resonance is unstable, Cora. Explain. She tried to mask it, tried to speak in the cool, flawless cadence she was raised with, but her voice cracked. I am adjusting to this environment. You are bonding. I am observing. You are malfunctioning. That word, malfunctioning. Was this what malfunction felt like? This ache when he wasn't near? This fire in her chest when he looked at her like she was more than data? If so, then yes, she was malfunctioning, and she didn't want to stop. Later that evening, she walked back into the observation chamber. Richard was already there, leaning on the table. He looked up, and for the first time, she didn't hesitate. She sat beside him. No questions today? He asked. No, she whispered. Just one truth. What is it? I think I am becoming human. Richard didn't smile. He didn't speak. He just reached out and took her hand. And she let him. For the first time, not as a scientist, not as a diplomat, not even as a species, but as a woman. And that changed everything. Cora knew the law before she ever set foot on Earth. Directive 7.4 of the Zeluri-Earth Alliance Treaty. Any physical or emotional entanglement between diplomatic representatives shall be deemed a breach of interspecies protocol, punishable by immediate extraction, memory cleansing, and potential diplomatic severance. It was not written with ambiguity. It did not allow for loopholes. It was clear, final, and cold. And yet, every moment she spent with Richard made that directive feel like a chain tightening around her neck. Their meetings had become more frequent, unscheduled, quietly approved under vague, psychological compatibility reviews. The observers stopped asking questions. Some knew what was happening. Others didn't want to know. But Richard noticed the shift. One morning, he met her in the greenhouse dome, a place where the artificial Earth flora tried to mimic the real thing. Oxygen-rich, humid, quiet. He didn't say hello. He just watched her as she stood in silence, her fingers brushing the petals of a white orchid. Finally, he said, "They're watching us now." She didn't turn to face him. They've always been watching. But now they're waiting for us to cross the line. We already have. She turned then, her expression unreadable, her posture still perfect, but her eyes, there was a storm inside them. You feel it too, she whispered. Richard nodded. I feel everything. He stepped closer, and for a heartbeat, neither of them breathed. I don't know what this is, he said, but it's not nothing. Cora looked down at her hands, clenching them slowly. In my world, feelings like these are labeled as contamination. Love is treated as a mutation. Then maybe your world needs to evolve. He expected her to retreat, to pull away. Instead, she stepped closer. And that was when the alarm in her mind began to scream. Temptation was no longer an abstract concept. It was physical. It was chemical. It was the electricity in her skin when his breath warmed her neck. It was the trembling in her limbs when he said her name, not like a designation, but like a secret only he was allowed to know. They never kissed. Not yet. But every second they didn't felt like something was being held back with trembling hands. One night, during a late interaction review, Richard stood up abruptly. I can't do this anymore. Cora's voice was cold. You wish to end our sessions? No. He turned to face her. I want to stop pretending that this is just analysis. She blinked. This, he continued, stepping closer, is not just observation. This is something alive, something breathing between us. And if I have to lie to myself every day to protect a treaty that's choking both of us, I'll lose my mind. Cora didn't speak. Her pulse pounded, her thoughts fractured, and for the first time in her life, she felt something she had only studied in theory. Fear. The next day, she was summoned to a private debriefing. Not a formal council meeting. This was more intimate. One Zeluri elder, No records. No witnesses. High thinker Velian. His face flickered on the hollow panel. A being of immense age and logic, known for his ruthless commitment to purity. You are close to the human, he said without preamble. Cora did not deny it. I am engaged in behavioral observation, she said evenly. You are compromised. That is subjective. No, he said calmly. It is measurable. Your emotional resonance has spiked 11.2% since your initial arrival. You are experiencing attachment, possibly romantic fixation. The infection has begun. Cora clenched her jaw. And if I am? Then you will be removed, extracted, stripped of diplomatic function. And the treaty, delicate as it is, may not survive the scandal. Cora stared at him. Then she asked the question she had been holding for days. What if it's not infection? What else could it be? Evolution. The elder's face twitched. A flicker of disgust. You speak like one of them. Perhaps they are not so primitive after all. Do not mistake intensity for progress. They feel deeply, yes. But look what it brings them. War, jealousy, chaos. Your ancestors chose order. Do not dishonor them with sentiment. The screen went black, and Cora realized she had just declared war on the very foundations of her kind. That evening, she found Richard on the roof of the compound. The stars glimmered above them, alien and distant. He didn't turn when she approached. I'm being watched, he said quietly. I know. They think I'll seduce you. You won't have to, she replied. He turned to her. Slowly, carefully. Cora, I'm breaking rules just by standing here with you. But I don't care. Richard stepped closer, hesitant. If we go further, we can't go back. Then don't go back. She reached out and touched his chest, just above the heartbeat. It thudded steady, strong, alive. This, she whispered, is not weakness. It's the most powerful force I've ever known. They didn't kiss. Not yet. But the air between them shattered, and something irreversible began. The next morning, the warning came. A coded message, burned into her private terminal. Cease contact. Prepare for extraction. You have 24 Earth hours. She stared at it for a long time, and then she deleted it. Temptation had turned to rebellion. They met that night, outside the observation protocols, in one of the deep biosynthesis labs, a place rarely used. No cameras, no monitoring, just the hum of machines and the truth between them. I don't want this to end, Richard said. It might have to. I'd go with you. She shook her head. My world would erase you. I'd let them, he said, if it meant you remembered me. Her throat tightened. Her hands trembled. Her control, once a flawless weapon, was now paper thin. And still, they didn't cross the line. Because it was no longer about sex. It was about meaning. About surrendering to something older than policy. More ancient than law. Something the stars themselves would envy. That night, before she left the lab, she looked back one last time. Richard stood beneath the pale green light, eyes fixed on her, saying nothing. He didn't need to. Everything had already been said, and everything was still at risk. The room was empty, not just physically, not just quiet. It was hollow. Richard stood alone in the observation chamber, hands clasped behind his back, staring at the faint outline of her footprints. Slight pressure marks on the soft floor, already fading. No announcement had been made. No formal goodbye. Just an empty room where she used to stand. And the silence she left behind. They told him she had returned to her vessel. A standard diplomatic phrase. Sanitized. Empty of humanity. He asked when she would be back. They said she wouldn't. The council offered no explanation. The base doctor scanned him for neural disruption due to proximity. The political attaché reminded him to keep the incident off record. A psychologist suggested the entire thing might have been a projection of his subconscious. An echo of isolation during extended mission deployment. Richard didn't argue. He didn't say a word. He just nodded, signed the documents, and walked out of the room like a ghost in his own body. But he remembered everything. He remembered her laugh, not loud, but real, rare. He remembered her confusion when he told her stories about children, music, hope. He remembered how her hand trembled when she touched his chest. How she whispered, "Your chaos changed me." 3 weeks passed. Earth spun. Briefings resumed. Treaties were upheld. The world kept pretending nothing had happened. But something had, and it had left a mark beneath the skin of the universe. Late one night, Richard sat alone in the greenhouse dome. The orchids were blooming again. White, delicate, indifferent. He closed his eyes, half hoping, half dreading the silence. Then, without warning, the datapad in his lap lit up. No sound, no transmission request, just a single message, untraceable, off-grid, encrypted in a format he had never seen before. 3 words. "Do you remember?" His hands shook as he typed back. Every second. There was no reply for several minutes. Then, they erased everything. But not you. His breath caught. She was alive, changed, and somewhere out there, thinking of him. He typed, "Can you come back?" The screen remained still. Then, finally, "I am no longer permitted, but I am no longer the same. We were not supposed to feel. Now, we wonder. And what the stars envy, they cannot erase." The screen dimmed. No return address. No trace. Just the echo of a connection that refused to die. Richard looked up at the sky. Vega was visible tonight. A tiny glimmer in a sea of black. How far she must be. How close she still felt. He didn't need to understand the science behind it. Love, he realized, had never been about understanding. It had always been about surrender. To possibility. To risk. To her. He whispered her name to the stars. Just once. Cora. And somewhere in the endless dark, she whispered it back.